Welcome to Call Your Hits, a Storm Riders Airsoft podcast. Thanks for joining us, everyone. Well, I am back from Ironhorse. I'm back in the studio office here, back with Pat, and it's a bit of
He,
a
he has survived.
despite George's Heat's best effort, I suppose. Um, yeah, it's back to our old shenanigans, back to our normalcy in a way, back to our regular routine. We're not done talking about Iron Horse. Obviously we're going to talk about it a little bit today. We're going to be doing some more podcasts with some of the people who went with us to Iron Horse to get some of their perspectives as well in future episodes. Um, Today, what I wanted to talk about with Pat is to have a bit of a conversation about what happens when you come back from an event like this. You go, for someone like myself, it's your first event, or maybe it's your first really big event like this, or you've done something completely different that you do from your local, and then you go back to your local field and you have this sense of like, okay, what now potentially? So that's what we want to talk about.
And I mean, we've got, a wide range of experiences to draw on, right? Like, because you were there with so many people from our Discord rocking the Storm Riders Foreign Legion, um, you know, and I got to say, guys, just, this is my first time talking to the people on the Discord other than via text since you guys went. I love the photos. Like,
Good
awesome.
looking bunch.
Yeah, handsome bunch of people. um, so I think everyone's going back to something smaller because, like, I doubt everyone plays Iron Horse every weekend. If you do, envious.
Yeah, definitely.
But and everyone's going back to different sizes of community, right? You were saying that some people's are very small.
Yeah, well, when I was talking to Riley, she was telling me that um, her community is like four or five people. Her and Carter. I think it's a very very small group. Um,
And like, that's awesome.
yeah,
You're playing airsoft, you're having fun. Perfect, right? That is the goal.
and I mean, some people like you think about Matt in California, like he's playing airsoft in Stockton, and they've got 100 players or whatever, and then we've got our community, which on any given weekend can be anywhere from 15 to 25, maybe 30 on a really really good day. So there's a lot of variety, and also there's lot of variety in what you're doing. Um, Iron Horse, depending on who you talk to, Iron Horse was either extremely dynamic and like an amazing experience, like it was for me. For some people who are more accustomed to games like that, some of the things that we did might have seemed a little bit less entertaining, just from the perspective of it was a lot of area control, not a lot of missions. And if that's what you're going for a milsim, like you don't necessarily get that experience every time, but you want some of that. But guaranteed, like most people are not doing a 12-hour continuous play or 10 hours continuous play game every single weekend at their local, or maybe even every month. Like that's a huge amount of time to be playing.
I mean, like, just not to make jokes about how old I am right at the beginning of the episode, like I always do, but like, man, I assume you were out of gas for a couple of days when you got home. Like,
Well, no, not me. No. Other people maybe, but I mean, I've been working on my endurance for a really long time, so I'm not a really good benchmark.
sure, but like, I don't necessarily even mean just like physically fatigued, like just playing for 12 hours. And I mean, again, maybe I'm wrong on this.
Oh, I
Like, I
see what
haven't
you're
played
saying. Yeah.
as a player in a 12-hour op, but like, that's a full day of brain on, engaged in task. And like, if I had to go to work on Monday and I did that on Sunday, I'd be sort of like, ooh.
Yeah.
Now, admitting my job involves more loud gremlins than many people's.
It's about exactly the same number of loud gremlins that were on the field, as it turns out.
Wicked.
But
10 out
yeah.
of 10.
But yeah, I see what you're saying. Yeah, there's definitely that sort of that mental fatigue, and once you play a big game like that, you're probably not going to want to hit your local game that same weekend when or what have you. Financials is one thing, of course. It's expensive to play a game like that.
I am out of everything.
Yeah,
Oh,
out of BBs, out of grenades, out of everything. Which of course grenades are not a thing here, but yeah.
Yeah, I gotta say, we've seen a couple of videos. You look like you were having fun.
Yeah, you know what? I actually threw fewer grenades that I anticipated, but all of mine got used. And this is classic Phil behavior of like, I'm not, I've got the right tool, but I'm not in the right position. Here's a grenade, use it. Right. So that happened to me
And I mean,
2 or 3 times where I gave Jimmy a grenade to throw around a corner. I gave Jordan a grenade to throw around a corner because they were closer. They needed it. They didn't have one. And I'm Johnny on the spot. Here you go and use it.
but I mean, hey guys, like, that is another like 26 of you guys. So 26 people who know that we, or 25 minus you, who know we practice what we preach, right?
Yeah, well,
Like,
that's true.
you know, like, yeah, throwing pyro, I assume, is super fun, right? Like, frankly, throwing the tornado grenades that we've basically worn out was super fun.
Yeah.
But I think I deployed less than half of the uses of mine just because people are like, need a grenade. And I'm like, all right, I'm 10 feet back. Here you
Yeah,
go.
that's right.
Like,
Yeah, so there was a fair amount of that. But I mean, coming back to it, I think, yeah, when you're doing that, you're probably not hitting your local field right away. Um, but it's sort of like once you've experienced that, at least for me, like experiencing that game at that field. So you're talking about, you know, 3 p.m. to like midnight. So it's 9 hours of play and then 4 hours the next day on a field that, the width of that field from our fob to, which is basically at the farthest east side, all the way to the parking lot gate, which was the entrance to the field. I mean, that's 800 meters, right?
and I think there were some buildings you were in that are bigger than most of Frontline.
Well, yeah, and this is
Like,
what I was going to say. Like when the whistle blew and we ran to the front of the tunnels, that run from the fob to the front of the tunnels was a longer run than the entire field of Frontline. Right? If I start at
right?
the gate and I run all the way to the backside, that's still not as long as those tunnels. And then it
I'm like,
continues going. Like you have another more than double that length coming out of the tunnels, right?
I gotta ask, um, because for me there was this visual sensation of like, I have watched a ton of videos shot at that place on YouTube and gone like, that's so cool.
Mhm.
Was like walking into the building and being like, I've seen this a lot. Like, holy shit.
Yeah, like well, it's so funny because when we were just walking on the field, and so some of the field, like the field is always changing, not the field, but the facility is always changing. They can move stuff around. It's not from the buildings, all their vehicles and props, like they can move them right different places. Even the down Hercules is on wheels, so they can move it and put it in different places because different.
Okay, like, I wargaming nerd for a minute here, right? Like, I build Wii terrain pieces that we move around the table. That's cool as
Well, I
hell.
mean, it's because their clients, the Guardian Center, require different things sometimes, right? Um,
Totally. And it's just, that makes sense to me. I'm like, the school I work at, I don't think this has ever come up before, has a theater. So like, and like a full size one. So like, they move big props around and like do really cool set stuff.
mhm,
I'm like, I've participated in that largely because they're like, you Gronk, move thing.
yeah.
Zug zug. We know how this goes. But like, yeah, so they moved it down to Hercules.
Yeah. Well, if you look at it on like Bing Maps versus Google Maps, it's not in the same place. Or you
Like,
can look at a different version from like last year, and it's not.
that's
Yeah.
sick.
But so coming back to it, like I remember like we were walking on the field, and we're walking, and on the right side there's like they're downed like the ruined building or whatever. That's like a parking garage sort of simulation or whatever, and it's on hydraulics, so they can make it taller if they need to for whatever reason. Like it's
Awesome.
crazy, and there's a downed helicopter there, and then we're walking. There's an MRAP, and then there's like 3-story buildings, and I remember just looking at Johnny being like, dude, what the hell are we doing here? Like, this is insanity. Like, this is not airsoft. Like, this is way too serious. Now, that sort of obviously fades as you start playing, but like the immediate hit was like, this is insanity. Um, and so, it's my first time ever playing in buildings that were designed as buildings. They're not meant to be airsoft buildings. Like this is a structure that is, this one looks like a gym. This one looks like a hospital. This one looks like, or internally is meant to look like a church or, whatever, right? A warehouse.
And like,
Yeah.
that's got to be cool, partly because I know, um, as a teacher, and like, from teaching people who play airsoft, also like, no one who works in a school or exists in a school and who plays airsoft has ever not thought about how awesome it would be to have like the school closed for a couple of days and use it for an airsoft game. Like,
Yes.
you know
Although thematically, maybe not the best. But
Yeah, there. I mean, there are. I guess I'll just cop to. There are some nice things about, um, you know, living in Canada.
yeah,
We'll leave it at that.
but yeah, so I think that was pretty insane. But I mean, looking at this, and I joked on the Discord, I'm like, once we play Iron Horse, like I'm not playing Airsoft again, right? Like you can forget it. Like there's no way for me to go
This
back,
is
right?
the oldest joke in fighting games. All right, I have played one round. I have won. I will retire undefeated. I am never playing this game
Yeah,
again.
but there is a question, in the back of my mind, and I mean, I'm sure of other people's. It's like, how do you go back to your local when you've experienced that, right? Like everything is going to pay. I mean, I remember having a conversation with Johnny, thinking like, we ran 400 meters to start the first game. You can't do that at frontline. The field is legitimately not big
I
enough for you to run
was gonna
400
say we can
meters,
we can go up to the road and jog
right?
down, like
Like,
go to the highway and jog down to the field.
yeah. So I remember we were having a conversation in the hotel. It's like, how easy is this going to be now for us? Because we have this perspective. And so I was really thinking about, well, what is this? And because I was thinking about it as well on sort of, coming home. I was like, well, what are we going to do? How are we going to adapt the play at the field to to change things up, or to make it different, or what have you, to incorporate, not necessarily things that we saw, but to make it more dynamic, more fun, or change it, right? Because really, like, my perspective has shifted very significantly on Airsoft in a matter of 2 days, right?
And I feel like, to extrapolate the experience, because I didn't go. Um, you know, when we were doing kendo and I went to a seminar
Hmm.
and graded, I came back and it was like, okay, so there's a bunch of things that we're doing that everyone is doing, and then there's this other stuff that we should maybe
Hmm.
rethink, right? Or if not necessarily like rethink in terms of like burn it down and rebuild it from the ground up, but like there's a bunch of stuff we need to adjust or tinker with.
So yeah, and I mean, I think there's a challenge too, or not a challenge, but like a danger of, like, when you were talking about the kendo seminar that you were talking about, or like for me, like coming back and being like, okay, all the people you left behind, right? I've been to the big leagues. I know what it's like, right? And here's what we got to change immediately. And it's
I mean,
not that the
it's
points are invalid, but there's a way to approach that in certain ways too.
yeah. I mean, I feel like um, everyone who's ever engaged in a hobby has probably encountered that guy who's like, I have figured out how we should be doing this, and I'm your new messiah. Here's how the hobby should be.
Hmm.
And I think equally, who's been in a hobby for a long while knows that usually doesn't go across well.
Yeah, definitely.
Whereas, hey guys, let's try cool ideas usually does.
Hmm.
But it's a very, it's simultaneously like an easy distinction to make here and not necessarily to execute.
Yeah, and so, some of the things that I experienced at AMS that, uh, I think, in a way, like, myself included, had been sort of sandbagging the community in a way by making assumptions about what would and would not be acceptable, or would or would not be possible, without actually testing to see whether that actually made sense or not. And one of the big things that, we're trying this year for our next Operation Neon Sunrise, is having replica weapon classes, right? So using sort of similar designations that they use, at AMS. So, rifleman, SSW, squad support weapon, DMR, bolt action sniper rifle, and then SMG, which is not used, submachine gun, which is not used at, AMS, but is fun based on what conversations we had on the Discord and what people have said that they were found fun, as well as some of the rules that made sense versus some of them that didn't. So, for example, when you talk about a DMR, some people say, well, it has to be 7.6, a replica of a 7.62, which doesn't really make sense because you have lots of DMRs that are in different calibers other than that one. So instead, we say, well, it has to have a tube optic, it has to have like a long barrel, stuff like that, right? And actually, I had always been opposed to that idea here, right? We'd had conversations
I mean,
about it because we were like, nah, people aren't going to go for that. Like,
yeah,
yeah,
I think it's one of those things we've both been like, that would be cool. And then we go, but how do we accommodate the new player? How do we accommodate the renters? Will people step up?
yeah,
And um, I mean, like it was posted on a local Discord for the local field the other day, and people have already been like, "Yeah, that seems really cool." So, um, whoops,
Well, and I mean,
you
it's
know.
it's just lesson learned, but I think
But
to your point, when it comes to okay, well, how do you come back with some of these ideas that you have around what's going, what needs to change or things you want to try? Our approach is very much like, okay, well, let's try stuff. We're not committing to anything, but it's a 3 hour game. Let's see how people react to it, see if it's fun, see if it works. One of the things that I've said is, well, if you want to run an SSW, it has to be a replica of an actual SSW. You can't just have an M4 and put a box mag on it. But if we don't have enough people with SSWs who want to play, well then yeah, you can take your M4 and put a box mag on it. Like why not? Like I think there's a middle ground to be found to
yeah,
get
it's
people to
a
try it.
mixture of like, well, I mean, to use just that example, right? In that case, we're accommodating the people who actually went out and bought an LMG or SSW of some sort.
Mhm.
Um, in the sense that they don't necessarily get or really have never gotten to game them in a system where they're the only people with a box mag and auto,
Yeah.
right? Um, and then if we don't have enough of those to fill the slots we want to fill, sure, no problem. We'll tinker it around, make it work. And I think that's a good place to be in.
Yeah, and so that's sort of how I'm approaching sort of modifications to the game. Not necessarily based on just AMS stuff. Like I'm not looking to lift and shift a lot of the stuff from AMS. Although one of the things I did learn playing this game is they have a 5 minute bleed out timer, and that's totally fine. I was always like of the impression that it's too long. 5 minutes is too long, but it's like actually 5 minutes is fine. Like most people need a sit down break. Most people are fine sitting down waiting for a medic or what have you. And like you can just set a timer on your phone. You can look at your watch. You can count it out if you absolutely have to. And
Yeah, and like I think we've said this before, but like a if you're worried about your smartwatch or whatever, or your fancy watch getting smoked, then go buy a $20 digital watch that's waterproof and you're good,
or just
right?
take
And
your
just use
watch
that
and
for
face
yourself.
it on the inside of your wrist. Like it's not the end of the
I mean,
world,
that's
right?
usually what I do.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
Yeah. I just like to present feasible alternatives because I'm like that.
Yeah. And so like I think the challenge though is you can modify sort of how the games are run, but the thing that we can't change is the footprint of our field. Right? And so we have been abutting with that as a challenge for a while, like regardless of Iron Horse. The reality is that Iron Horse did not make that field smaller. It makes it maybe feel smaller, but it's the exact same size when we left it. Maybe accounting for erosion or whatever. But like, so it's the same size. And the
Yeah,
problems we
some of it
had,
probably fell into the
yeah,
sand.
the problems we had before are still going to continue, right? One, but on the flip side of that, going to Iron Horse or any sort of big event also doesn't actually change anything about the field, right? So it can be you can look at the stuff that's out there and go, "Oh my god, I've experienced this. I'm never going to be able to go back." Why? You were having fun at that field before. Are you not going to have fun there anymore by virtue of what you've experienced? There
I
might
mean,
be different, right? But
this is a comparison is the thief of joy kind of place, right?
yeah,
And like you have to manage it, obviously, like, in the sense that like I don't think you'll find it any easier to take hiding in the wooden construction helicopter seriously, right? But you might find it a little harder. But at the same time, at the end of the day, I imagine one of the takeaways from Iron Horse is like, okay, so yes, this is a different league in terms of the set dressing, but like, is airsoft still airsoft?
yeah. That's the big thing that really stuck out to me is that like once we started going and the sort of sticker shock wore off, right? And we were in the tunnels fighting for 2.5 hours or in the buildings or whatever. I didn't really perceive what I was doing in that particular moment any different than like being in a two-story window at frontline, putting fire down across it. Like it's the same. The mechanics are still the same. And I think when I think about sort of the things that don't need to change, we've done a lot of work, on our personal skills. We've done a lot of work on, ready ups and transitions and reloads and gear management, right? And making sure that our gear works for us and not the other way around. And all of those things were essential.
As an aside, props to John for the shorts.
Well, he wasn't wearing shorts at the game. He was wearing like he had those like longer like rolled cuff pants. He got lots of props about his outfit because he did like this sort of like Vietnam like jumpsuit situation with an M1 helmet and a crank, and like it was it was a choice. But he got lots of comments on
John
it, compliments on it because he didn't
John
look like
John plays
anybody else.
airsoft like I play Fallout.
Yeah,
Like,
but coming back to it, I think you're right. Like it's airsoft is still airsoft, and so the skills that we had built individually were still extremely transferable. And what's really interesting is that if you look at someone like Riley or Carter, who come from a very small community, their individual skills, their replica manipulation skills, their ability to do reloads, their ability to hit targets, that was super important. I remember I was with Riley on a wall, like at a 3 stories, looking at a 3 story structure before some sort of disastrous raid. And I said to her, I was like, "Hey, can you range that?" And she was like, "Yeah." And I was like, "Oh, okay, all right, that's fine." But I mean, no problem, right? And so she's learning to do that with 3 other people, 4 other people, 5 other people at her field. Like, doesn't matter. Like, those are skills that are transferable. Where things are very different, and where I think um, the Iron Horse event in particular, compared to what we do at Frontline. Firstly, we never get to roll 25 Storm Riders deep, let alone 8 Storm Riders deep. Like, it never happens.
well, and
Um,
like, I think just to pause for 1 second on that thought,
mhm.
you know, like you said since you came back that it was like rolling with 25 people with the same mindset, the same skill set, the same approach. And like on the one level, I'm not shocked because hey, like we've created this wicked community online of like-minded lunatics. um but like it's really cool to have it confirmed that like yeah, this is how we do, and it works as a group, and it glues the group of people, like that mindset and that approach and the planning that you guys put in beforehand glues that group of people who are from everywhere
Yeah.
into one united effective group. And I love that. That's so cool.
I mean, it was awesome, but I think that is the thing that stood out to me the most as the biggest differentiator in terms of gameplay. My personal skills were my personal skills. Shooting out of windows, shooting whatever, that was fine. Where it was different was the coordination that existed between a group of players, right? Like working with like Jordan looking through a door, like a crack in the door, being like, okay, there's a guy there, they're not looking at us. If we run to that building and don't shoot, then collectively all of us can like throw grenades in the windows, jump in the windows, do a bunch of stuff. And like then going and executing that, right? Or just being able to work and support each other, like support by fire, in a way that you really don't see that a lot at Frontline. And it's not because it can't happen, it just sort of doesn't, right? Like, you think about the road games that we play, or like the death matches, the objectives games that we play, even assaulting the village. I did a building assault at Iron Horse, supported by a saw gunner, and that went awesome. If that had been at Frontline, we would have just rolled right into the village. Like, it would have been no problem. But people don't play like that at our field, right? And so being able to get the coordination that you need to play like that is I think one of the things that is the most interesting to me, because that's the missing piece. One of the things that I was really worried about was going out there and getting my ass kicked on a personal skills level. Do you know what I mean? Because it's like, well, I only
Yeah,
play in a
totally.
small community. Like, all these people on the main line at these big games, they're way better at this than I
Yeah,
am.
there's that like, oh yeah, are we like big fish small pond, right?
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
um and like you sort of alluded to this, like Iron Horse is not some bush league airsoft.
But the reality that I found out is that actually, in a lot of ways, it is. It's just, what if you think of the like diaspora of airsoft and the slice of what a typical airsoft field looks like. AMS events are exactly the same, just blown up in scale. It's 600 players instead of 100. I was in line to get Chaz's AEG chrono, and there was a person behind me with their dad, and they were asking me about the weapon light that I had on the, well, not mine, Chaz's SR 16, Mark 18, whatever, small gun. Um, and I
Probably Mark
was I
18.
was at capacity at the time. Like, I couldn't really think straight, and so I just said, "Okay, this is my gun. Sorry, I can't really help you. I don't really know." But their concern was, they didn't know, they had never played a game like this before, and they didn't know whether they should keep a weapon light on all the time or just put it on at night. And so this is this person's very first game. During the initial briefing, and again at the end, Bo, the one of the co-founders of American Muslim, said that 50 to 60% of the players, it was their first time playing. Right? When we
That's so
were
cool.
when we were looking at the actual player base, like lots of people had to take breaks because it was so hot, right? Lots of people were not really prepared for the intensity, the heat, etc. And that's okay, right? You get that whole slice of airsofters. You have people who could go all day. I think about like Matt, for example, or Steve, who was rolling with me for a while. Like these guys can go all day. Great, right? Other people can't, and that's fine too. Like it's really and I don't mean this disparagingly at all. It's the McDonald's of airsoft. Like it's available and accessible for everybody, right? And it's
Good.
consistent.
And that's what we want, right? Like, um, not that this is going to work everywhere, but like we've all seen videos of like guys in wheelchairs who play airsoft because their wheelchair is capable of dealing with the field. Awesome,
Yeah,
right? Like, if you're out there going, man, like I don't want to be inclusive, why?
yeah.
you
But
know,
so to come back, what I meant is that like you said, it's not some bush league airsoft, and I mean it's not, but it also is just a regular slice of airsoft. So there are people at this field who are much better than me. And there are people who I was better than because I've been playing for a really long time, and all points in between, right?
yeah, and I mean that brings us back to sort of like that idea of like, yeah, airsoft is airsoft,
Yeah.
right? Which is like one of the things that I took away from that kendo experience is, yeah, kendo is kendo. Like,
Yeah.
at the end of the day, yeah, there is no such thing as bush league airsoft, right?
It's just
There's
airsoft.
such things, yeah, there's such things as different qualities of prop or like levels of built up play experience and like field to play on.
Mhm.
And like certainly at the end of the day, if you have access to a like multi-story structure with buildings to like play in, you're going to be way better at room clearing than Phil and I probably.
Yeah.
Um, you know, cool, that's awesome. But outside of specific stuff like that, I think one of the cool things to keep in mind coming back from it, I hope one of the things to keep in mind coming back from it is this is still airsoft. Airsoft is fun.
Yeah. And so coming back to normalcy, I think, the temptation to be like, "Oh, well, all other airsoft is gonna pale in comparison." I mean, it's a natural sort of immediate response. But
Totally.
I think looking at what you have and being like, okay, well, I'm grateful for what I have because it allows me to have fun the way that I have in a more, in an easier way. Playing airsoft for 9 hours is a lot. And like being able to just go and, shoot the shit for like, 30, 3 hours and is great too. And sort of all points in between. And so as we talked about, I think at the beginning, it's like, okay, well, you don't want to come back here being like, okay, we got to change everything. And like, I'm the messiah of airsoft and blah, blah, blah. There's ways to approach that, but I think also going the other route of being like, okay, well, I'm only ever going to play these events and I'm not going to play at my local anymore is probably also not the right response, because one of the things that is really important or was really important was the personal skills. And you're not going to keep those up if you're not regularly playing and like testing your gear and stuff like that. So a
And
balance
like
then, right?
any Yeah, and like any response that robs you of fun is probably the wrong
Yeah,
one.
especially in a hobby, right?
Um right, exactly, so and like in terms of, going to play, this weekend or whatever, I can provide you one thing that Iron Horse at least this year could not. You could not shoot Pat.
That's true. Yeah, I could not.
And we all know you do like shooting Pat.
I mean, it's all right. Um, but so I think that really sort of is my take, has been my take on sort of this like return to normalcy. And so now the question is the so what? Excuse me. One of the things as well that I'm really taking away from Iron Horse is all of these games that they play in facilities, that they organize, etc. They all started with someone at the event organizer level contacting some other organization and being like, "Hey, we want to host an airsoft event at your location." Whether that's a training facility, whether that's a privately owned land, whatever. And for the longest time, we've really said that Frontline is the only place that we can play. And that's because the only other place that we had was Red Cliff, and that's really not viable, especially haven't been there recently. It's just a complete no go. So, but now I'm starting to think about, okay, well, what are other places that we could play and have events at by actually being like grown-ups, not trying to do this guerrilla airsoft, and I mean guerrilla like GUER, not gorilla airsoft. This
I
guerrilla,
do that all the
yeah,
time.
exactly. That's why I specified. Like not
Right.
doing this guerrilla airsoft of just trying to play wherever we can, but contacting people who own land and being like, "Hey, we would like to host an event at your facility, whatever that is." And then seeing what their response is. I know several years ago, one of the other teams had contacted a community here in the province and tried to organize something. And I can't recall sort of what the specifics of that were, but fundamentally, that's something that is within our wheelhouse. So over the last little while, um, last when I came back, and then sort of again this week, I've been sending out emails being like, "Hey, this is who we are. This is what we've done. You've got a field of interest, or you've got something that is interesting here. We would like to host a game or host an event at your location," and see what they say. Worst case Ontario, they say no, and we're no better off or worse off than we were currently, right?
I mean, for the opportunity cost of sending an email, you're doing okay.
Exactly. But best case scenario, they're at least willing to entertain sort of the conversation. And the way that um, I'm sort of approaching this is that like this happens in other places, right? This happens on the mainland, in mainland Canada. This happens United States at these other facilities. They host, like Galactic Civil War was held at a mine somewhere in Missouri, I think it was, if I'm not mistaken, Wisconsin, perhaps. Anyways, regardless, that happens there. So why would it be any different for us? Like there's the opportunity for us to reach out and say like, okay, where else can we organize something? Where else? And I'm not saying like go there play every weekend, but like as a special event, right? If you have a
Yeah.
facility that's closed on the weekend, would they be willing to rent it out? Right? And
Yeah. Totally.
now money would have to change hands and people would have to pay to play and all this kind of stuff. It wouldn't be the same as, back when we were the good old days of playing at Redcliffe. Um, but the potential is still there. And if the location is really cool, like there are places that I think about here, like for example, in Conception Bay South, they have that talc mine. Remember, we did a photo shoot there several years ago.
Yeah. Extremely cool.
Like, why would we not? Why could we not play an airsoft game there, assuming the owners were okay with it? I mean, airsoft guns are not going to damage anything more than their mining equipment will,
Yeah.
right?
Certainly.
Um,
And like most companies like an extra money, like, at $5 is $5.
And if we assume liability, right? So we have, liability insurance, professional liability insurance for the event, and there is no risk to them, then of course stuff like that is possible. So that's really one of the things that I came back from AMS with. It's this not idea of like, oh well, we're going to change everything, but like actually maybe a couple of emails, maybe a couple of conversations is all you need to open up a new place to play that provides a different experience for your community. Now, I don't want to get anybody's hopes up, especially if you're local and you're listening to this. I don't think that talc mod is going to work out. But I mean, I could be wrong. I just don't think there's any appetite for that. But there's lots of other places that exist, private land and so on. It's just a matter of having the right conversation with the right person to sort of get that off the ground and start building a relationship that allows you to do something different.
And like on a fundamental level, the fact that we've run events for Frontline successfully, and the fact that, you know, relative to say where we were 10 years ago, even
Hmm.
on this, like we are ugh, grown-ups. um,
Yep.
and that means that both people are more likely to treat that with reason, but also like we know a lot more, right? You, I'm sure, know how to go about getting that insurance set
Yeah.
up. um that's a benefit. um we are both fairly good at organizing events from a professional point of view and can demonstrate that. um that's a benefit. We have a bit more money than we had when we were in our 20s, which means that, like, if we need to front some money to organize renting a place, that's achievable.
Yeah. Exactly right.
Where, like, hey, they want $500. When I was 22, that was that's someone else's problem.
Yeah. Exactly right.
Right? Like, um, so I think that, yeah, like doing stuff like that. And I'll be honest with you, I hadn't thought about it, wouldn't have thought about it. I'm also probably too conservative in terms of my thinking about stuff like that in general.
Hmm.
Um, you know, Partly I think because, like, I tend to assume that anyone who'd rent a space would want $1 million, and that's not necessarily true. Like not suggesting like, oh, I'm trying to be down on the idea. I'm saying, yeah, I'm probably too conservative about this. This is not a thing I think about well. But like, I love the idea, and you know, full well that I'm in if we
Yeah.
can do stuff,
And I
right?
think ultimately the biggest, most important thing here is that with these, any sort of people we'd work with, like this is partnerships, right? It's not just a matter like these facilities aren't like that mine for as an example is not a rental facility, it's an active business. So if we were to work to get that facility, like, it would have to be a partnership. It's like, well, we're going to work with you on this, and like that's sort of the approach that we have to take on some of this stuff, but it's feasible.
Definitely,
Ultimately, what I've come to learn is that through having conversations with Bo and all this kind of stuff, like it's feasible, it's doable. If there's no reason that this can be done in Ontario, but it can't be done here. There's no reason
yeah.
this can be done in Alberta and it can't be done in Newfoundland. It's just a
I
matter
mean,
of finding the right place.
one of the cool takeaways from a bunch of our content over the last few months, I think, is like, um, I tend to talk about, there are no magic fairies inside your airsoft gearbox, just stuff that works. And here's how.
Hmm.
It turns out there aren't magic fairies inside your airsoft event either. There's just people working, and here's how.
Yeah,
And like, you know, uh, that's a matter of, I think, or that makes running events at other locations really more a matter of, are we willing to go out and find people and talk to them and explain what this is,
yeah,
and be good ambassadors for the sport in that way. And are we willing to put in the work? And we already know the answer to the second question.
exactly. And
So
I think the biggest challenge is just making sure that you find the right people to have the right conversation. It's easy for people to just say no, I'm not interested, or just ghost you and don't even answer. Which it's a challenge, it's a risk, but really the risk is minimal. Like, what are you losing? Time? Who cares, right? So that's sort of my biggest takeaway from Iron Horse. Aside from all the fun, we didn't really talk about that today. We'll save that for later. But
I would say we will.
um, it's really that like whatever community you're coming back to, like you're fortunate to have it, and there's opportunities. Like you don't want to discard that just because you had this really great experience. There's ways that you can use the experience that you've gained to make wherever you're playing better, whether that's because you focus on the skills that you thought were important during the game, or because you're applying some of the concepts that you learned. And so as the last bit for today's episode, we can talk a little bit about the next op that we have coming up, which is Operation Neon Sunrise. And the idea for this op was that we wanted to do something in the summer, but we also didn't want to spend a tremendous amount of time like organizing stuff and trying to figure it out. Wanted to figure something out that we could do for like basically 3 hours during the regular
Yeah,
open
okay.
slot.
Can we shorten the timeline and streamline the workload?
Yeah, exactly. And so I've gotten it down pretty well to a game that I feel I could run by myself. In fact, like Pat could play this game should he want to, and he has a machine gun, so I would suspect that he probably wants to. But really, like it's a matter of like
I'll spare you the rising hysterical laughter.
yeah, but it's a matter of like one game controller and like a couple of refs, and you're off to the races. And what I'm using this to test some of the mechanics that I really want to port. So we mentioned the designated roles, so that's one thing. The medic role, so that well, not the medic role, but the medic bleed out timer for a player going up to 5 minutes, which I think will be totally fine. Um,
I'm
we're
really intrigued by that. Like, I'm not disagreeing with you.
mhm.
I'm excited to see how it works.
Yeah, I think that the 5 minutes is going to be sufficient amount of time because the challenge is that um, we've been doing a 1 minute bleed out because I'm like it's easy to count to 60, right? Which is fine,
Yep.
but also it makes it hard for people to get to you potentially, so you're not getting medicked. Also, if after 1 minute you're just walking back to fob and then respawning, it also minimizes the impact of you actually being down for the other team, right? If the person has to wait 5 minutes, that gives you a bit more opportunity, especially because we want players to be able to search other players during this game. So if they're only down
I
for 1 minute, that's not enough time to like try and clamber over to them and search them, right?
I mean, like when you mentioned it and I started sort of thinking about it, um, one thing that comes to mind is, the amount of time, that people were spending at spawn in the last game, not like wasting it, just like, okay, I need a minute to take a breath, but also like I got to reload all this stuff. I got to reset my gear. You know, if you're, if you have a 5 minute dead counter, at least you're getting the break part of that, right? If you're carrying a bottle of water on like a granola bar, you can shove some of that in your face. Like there's benefit
Yeah.
there. Um, and I feel like it'll make the lives of the guys playing the medics a lot easier, in the sense that they won't have to be sprinting to everyone every 60 seconds.
Yes, absolutely.
Um, so yeah, I think it may end up being just a better version of the rule that makes playing with the rule more achievable. We'll see.
And if it turns out that 5 minutes is too long, like when we do for a longer op, then I don't have any like we could go down to 3 minutes or 4 minutes or something. Like I don't really mind, but I think that's going to be that. We're looking at doing camo for the factions, so we're looking at green based camo for one team, tan based camo for the other. And if you don't have either camo or you choose to dress civilian, then that's fine. You'll just get an armband. That'll be good. Um, and yeah, so those are a couple of things that we're testing, and then the gameplay mechanic is going to revolve around finding hidden information, finding hidden cases on the field. So in each of those cases, in lieu of instructions, I've put in a QR code. And when you scan the QR code with your phone, it shows you a picture of what the instructions are inside that case. And I have all the QR codes and the instructions numbered so they match. So if there's ever any discrepancy, the person can just say, "Oh, I have case number 7, and this is what it's telling me to do." It's like, well, okay, I think something must have gotten mixed up because that's not the right one or what have you. So that's all there. But this allows us to do is give instructions very clearly without necessarily having to print them out and put them in the case number one. But also potentially different people will get different instructions in the same case. So imagine a situation where you open the case and inside the case there is another sticker and you scan the QR code and it tells you to take the sticker that's in the case and put it on top of the other sticker, right? And so if you do that, then you've included two sets of instructions, but you don't have any chance of like the wrong team looking at the wrong one because they're always looking at the only one that's there that's visible, right? That's on the
That's cool.
case. So it's flexible and it's going to give the other thing is that it's going to give players something to look for aside from area control, right? So, you might say, well, Phil, how are they going to find cases they don't have control of the area? Well, that's true. But if that's not your priority, maybe you just leave, right? And then the other team can maybe find stuff or what have you. So
Yeah,
that's
if you don't have to control the area, then there's not necessarily reason to do it.
exactly. So area control will still be worth points, but not nearly as much as what the actual cases are. So, to give you an example, area control for the day will be worth a maximum of 60 points per cone, right? But one of the cases is worth 50 points, right? So yes, you can control this all day, but you might as well look for other cases. And there's going to be a lot of them, very, very well hidden on the field. Players aren't just going to be able to see them lying around somewhere. They're going to be hard to find, and so they're going to have to be very creative in how they look for them. Which again is it's going to be hard to do that because if you're afraid of people shooting you in the face, you're probably not going to be as attentive perhaps as you otherwise ought to be,
I
right?
hear being shot at narrows your focus.
Yeah. So those are a couple of things that we're trying to mix up, and so ultimately what we've decided is that the winner of the team that wins this event will get a big advantage going into the next op, our big op or 6 hour op in the fall, right? So this is sort of like a campaign. So for this one, we've also created factions. So the factions that we have, instead of having blue versus red, which is what we've always sort of done historically, this time we have the People's Republic of Newfoundland (PRN) and the Alliance of Confederated Municipalities (ACM). Right, and so it's going to be PRN versus ACM, and they're going to be the ones who are vying for control. So the idea of this event is that a military cargo plane containing valuable military equipment, documents, etc., had to jettison its contents during emergency maneuvers over the lat long coordinates, which turned out to be the lat long coordinates for frontline, but that's beside the point. Just a little detail. And then these two factions are trying to rush to recover this information, these weapons, etc. The PRN, because they want to stop the alliance of Confederation municipalities from continuing their uprising, basically. So it's you've got the PRN, who are the good guys in the way that the Empire is the good guys in Star Wars, and then you've got the alliance of Confederated municipalities, who are
That's
the
a kind of good guy.
good guys, like the rebels are the good guys in Star Wars.
Also, in fairness, a kind of good guy.
Yeah, a kind of good guy. So those are all things that, like, uh, it's not so much that I'm taking it from Iron Horse, but it sort of inspired me to look at this and be like, okay, well, you know what? Like at Iron Horse, they have cost versus CDF versus UFS versus whatever, and like you can lean into that if you want, or you can not, and that's up to you. It's kind of harder to do if you're just saying, hey, you guys are red team, you guys are blue team,
Yeah,
right?
there's less to lean into.
Yeah. So in this way, we're giving people players the opportunity to lean in, to cosplay a bit if they want to, like with the names of the factions, and like maybe they want to do up insignia or whatever. That's fine
Get
too, right?
morale patches made if you're super into it.
Yeah. And I think that unless the response to this from the community is that they absolutely hate it, which I would be surprised, probably
Yeah,
will be what we'll continue to do for future ops as well. Um, so yeah, so that's what Neon Sunrise is all about. It's testing out some new stuff to see what sort of sticks with the community. I heard loud and clear from the last op that they wanted sort of more objectives, more missions, less sort of area control. And so
like
yeah,
speaking as like to give you behind the scenes from our design point of view, awesome.
yeah, yeah,
Like
absolutely.
you know it's more interesting for us to devise those, and not that I've had a whole ton of devising on this one, because I think Phil really wants me to go LMG people,
That would be great.
which
Yeah,
I also like. um, but we're looking at this from a, hey, you guys, um like, how can we make this cool for you,
yeah,
right? And so people going, man, we want more objective based, like, go here, do stuff, and less area control. That's wicked. There are only so many ways to play capture the flag on a field that's not changing in size or layout.
exactly right, exactly right. So that's really why I was looking at this sort of like hide and seek sort of situation, because I think that one of the things we've been struggling with is how do we get players to go to parts of the field that never get used because fighting doesn't happen there. Well, this is a great way. Like if there's going to be objectives that are hidden there, like you're going to want to go out there, right?
You now have things to do over here.
Exactly. So that's the big part of all of that, is making sure that we get players all over the field, not just in the places where they always go, right? And spoiler alert, but some of the cases that they find might tell them to bring the case somewhere else on the field, right? Which might or might not be somewhere that is more or less occupied,
I
right?
was about to say, which, completely without knowing what you're inherently going to do there, means that some of the time it's going to be like, oh, well, time to remove some people from our way.
Or vice versa, we have to remove ourselves now, right? We have to pull
Yeah.
people back, or what have you. So it's going to be really interesting to see how people respond to it. I mean, I'm curious. It's going to be interesting for me as well to have you as a player, rather than just game control, because you'll be able to provide feedback on, like, okay, well, how do these mechanics work, and like, was it fun, was it not fun, and so on. So I'm looking forward to that. I think, in a weird way, Iron Horse has really changed my perspective, but also reinvigorated my desire to run these types of events, because I think that's what this was all about. It was just very big. That's the biggest difference. It was very big. It was very cool. They had a Hercules and a couple of MRAPs. Like that's
That's
cool as shit. But fundamentally, like you said so succinctly, like it's still just airsoft, right? So how we get players to experience that, even on a smaller scale, is going to be sort of a mission for me for the next little while.
awesome. I love it.
Yeah. Well, guys, that's all we have for you this week. Thank you so much for listening. As always, if you're looking to continue the conversation with us, have a chat, join us on the Discord. The link is in the description below. Until that time, that's all we've got for you. Thank you again for listening. We couldn't do this without you, and we will talk to you next week.
Thanks as always, guys. Have a great week.